or that his hallowed relics should be hid under a starry-pointing pyramid. Dear son of memory, great heir of fame, what needst thou such weak witness of thy name? In other words, he says to Shakespeare, you're already so famous, dude. You don't need any kind of, special monuments to be built in your honor. The celebration of Shakespeare, point out for your notes, is also the celebration of great art and, of course, great poetry. Maybe already at the age of 22, Milton is gesturing towards hoping that he can someday, possibly rival the great Shakespeare, right? Thou, back to the poem. Thou, in our wonder and astonishment, hast built thyself a livelong monument, for whilst to the shame of slow endeavoring art, thy easy numbers flow, and that each heart hath from the leaves of thy unvalued book those Delphic lines with deep impression took. Then thou, our fancy of itself bereaving, dost make us marvel with too much conceiving, and so sculptor in such pomp dost lie that kings for such a tomb would wish to die. I wish I could go into more details, but let's just point out by the end of the poem, he's already ready to say, kings, the greatest politicians, would love to have the thing you have, Shakespeare, namely the true fame, fame that is earned by virtue of genius. Already, maybe, Milton is beginning to think in those terms. We'll turn now to a poem that is often discussed, and I've already talked about this in a high school class as well earlier, his famous On His Being Arrived to the Age of 23 in 1631. At 23 years old, Milton is convinced he is a loser. I know, the guy who wrote Paradise Lost, right? But he's already convinced that his time is passing him by. He feels this sense of pressure. Remember our story from Matthew 25. He knows he's got talent. He worries that God will come back and say, what have you done with the talent I gave to you? How about this poem? It is a sonnet. How soon hath time, the subtle thief of youth, stolen on his wing my 23 year? Exclamation point. I'm 23 years old and I'm already getting old. My hastening days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud or blossom showeth. Perhaps my semblance might deceive the truth, that I to manhood am so soon arrived so near, and inward ripeness does much less appear, that some more timely happy spirits endureth. In other words, I'm at 23 years old. Other people at 23 have already done amazing things. I've done nothing. Now, to be fair, Milton had already done some important work by the age of 23. We know, we just read a few of those lines. But he says, I haven't done anything worthy of my talent. There's the key, right? Yet, he says, be it less or more, or soon or slow, it shall be in strictest measure even to that same lot, however mean or high, towards which time leads me. Time, by the way, used twice in this poem, capitalized. And the will of heaven, we think of Matthew 25 immediately. All is, if I have grace to use it so, as ever in my great taskmaster's eye. In other words, he sees and recognizes that there is an expectation going on here, and he wants to definitely be able to say, I've used my time well. Now, of course, at a 3B observation, we should point out, it's probably not a bad idea to ask that. What have you already accomplished? What do you still need to accomplish? How driven are you to accomplish it? Milton was very driven, no question. In a section that we'll next turn to, referred to as poems written at Horton, Berkshire. This is the 1635, his 6 years of study. We've got a couple of poems that we'll look at. He wrote two poems that are often juxtaposed. The first one is the Allegro, which is translated out of the Italian for the happy person or the happy man. He writes this one in 1633 at the age of 25. Let's take a look at this one, and here again, Keats was all over this poem. We can tell from some of the poetry he wrote. He even wrote a tribute to Melancholy, and of course clearly is borrowing here. We'll just read the opening lines and then the final line. Hence, loathed melancholy, go away, sadness, melancholy. This is going to be a poem about being happy. Of Service and his blackest midnight born, in Stygian cave forlorn, amongst horrid shapes and shrieks and sighs unholy, find out some uncouth cell where brooding darkness spreads his jealous wings. We're going to hear more about wings in our study of Paradise Lost. And the night raven sings there under ebon shades and low-browed rocks, as ragged as thy locks, in dark Cimmerian desert ever dwell. In other words, he tells melancholy sadness, go away. And then he goes through this poem talking about all of the different ways to be happy, at least contemplative. And then finally he finishes by sounding very much like Marlowe in his poem, Passionate Shepherd to His Love. These delights, if thou canst give, mirth with thee, I mean to live. Right? I'll live with you. You'll remember, come live with me and be my love, if these delights can move you, etc., etc., right? The second poem that goes along with this, Pensariso, is the melancholy man, not the happy man, but the melancholy, right? We'll read these opening lines. Hence, away, vain deluding joys, the brood of folly without father bred. How little you bested or filled the mixed mind with all your toys, dwell in some idle brain and fancies fond, with gaudy shapes possess, as thick and numberless as the gay motes that people the sunbeams, or likest hovering dreams, the fickle pensioners of Morpheus's train. But hail, thou goddess sage and holy, hail, divinest melancholy. By the way, with this fancies fond, we think of fond fancy scum and dregs of scattered thought from Sidney's Thou Blind Man's Mark, a sonnet that you can study at 3A on your own, right? And then finally, the final lines of this one as well, sounding very similar. He says, these pleasures melancholy give, and I with thee will choose to live. Which is an interesting juxtaposition. I'll let you do your own study of this. Is it better to spend your time always happy or always kind of contemplative and sad? Maybe a little bit, you know, kind of more contemplative thinking or whatever. We'll play the same game. Let's keep going as we have a few more minutes here. Let's play with his sonnet to the Nightingale. And again, we think of Keats's Ode to the Nightingale, don't we? We'll just play with this one. O Nightingale, that on yon blooming spray warblest at eve when all the words are still, thou with fresh hopes the lover's heart dost fill. While the jolly hours lead on propitious May, thy limpid notes that close the eye of day, first heard before the shallow's cuckoo bill, portend success in love. Oh, if Jove's will have linked that amorous power to thy soft lay, now timely sing, ere the rude bird of hate foretell my hopeless doom in some grove nigh, as thou from year to year hast sung too late. For my relief yet hadst no reason why, whether the muse or love call thee as mate, before them I serve, and of their train am I. Beautiful, beautiful melodic. The next text that we'll look at very quickly is Milton's Comus. Now he calls it a masque, which just basically means it's going to be kind of like a verse play of a kind. And this one was performed in front of some aristocrats that he wrote this poem for. It's a hymn to chastity, that is to say, sexual discipline, we might say. And in this poem, Comus is kind of like the tempter, and we're going to see the beginnings of possibly the very Satan that will open the pages of Paradise Lost as the great tempter, serpent-like, tempting a beautiful girl with two brothers looking for her because they were all in the woods together, and then they lost her, or she lost, or separated from them, and then had this temptation from this Comus character to maybe give away her virginity and that kind of thing. There's some wonderful lines here. Comus will say to the girl, "Nay, lady, sit. If I but wave this wand," he has this wand over to keep her kind of, you know, there. Your nerves are all chained up in alabaster. You are a statue, or as Daphne was, root bound that fled Apollo, turning into the laurel tree, right? The lady's response is wonderful. "Fool," she says, "do not boast. Thou canst not touch the freedom of my mind with all thy charms, although this corporal rind thou hast emanacled while heaven sees good." Back Comus responds, "Why are you vexed, lady? Why do you frown? Here dwell no frowns, nor anger from these gates. Sorrow flies far." She will say, "You can try to capture my body, but you cannot capture my mind. We want to make a point. We're going to hear a sentiment kind of like this when we hear Satan speak in the opening book of Paradise Lost. This same serpent, satanic-like figure, Komos, will try to tempt her again. Listen, lady, be not coy, sounding very much like Marvel to his coy mistress, a poem that we have studied together. And be not cozened with that same vaunted name virginity. Beauty is nature's coin, must not be hoarded, but must be current, and the good thereof consists in mutual and partaken bliss, unsavory in the enjoyment of itself. If you let slip time, like a neglected rose, we think of to the virgins to make much of time, gather ye rosebuds while you may. It withers on the stalk with languished head. Beauty is nature's brag, and must be shown in courts at feast, and sometimes solemnities, where most may wonder at the workmanship. Again, sounding very much like Marlowe's To His Coy Mistress, the argument is, hey, you need to use your beauty while you have your beauty, and if you don't use your beauty, well, then you're going to end up losing your beauty. Well, it's an argument that does not work. And her brothers find her, and ultimately she is freed from this Comus negative kind of character. The next poem that we'll take a look at, and it's unforgivable that I don't give an entire lecture on this, I just don't have the time, is Milton's famous poem, Lycidas. Now, let's say a few things about this poem, because I really do want you to go and read this poem on your own. I'll say just enough to kind of help you out here. This is what we call pastoral elegy, all right? It is referred to as a monody. That is to say, it's a tribute poem. The death of his college friend, Edward King. It's published in 1638. Milton was 30 at the time. He might have written it, actually, at the age of 28 earlier. It is really Milton's considered by scholars first great poem. And it ends up in a collection of poems that are tribute poems to Edward King as the last poem in that volume, which shows that everybody already understood this as a great, great poem. Many have argued two things are happening in this poem. One, obviously Milton is lamenting the passing of his friend. Two, he seems to be announcing in some way his own poetic career. Many readers have seen it this way anyway. Now, what's the background? August the 10th, 1637, Edward King, on his way home in the Irish Sea, drowns. It's tragic, right? Milton had lost his mother in 1637 and had declared that he himself would not take a career in the church. So 1637 is a major, major moment in his life, and by 1638 he's engaged in his travels to Italy and elsewhere. Now, Lycidas is a name borrowed from the great Roman poet Virgil. We cannot overstate this. Milton is very influenced by Virgil as poet and, of course, as genius. Now, some scholars have pointed out that in the older tradition, if you want to announce yourself as a great poet soon to be, you kind of do that whole thing of I'm about to become a poet or announcing your poetic career by writing an elegy. For example, Chaucer did it with the Book of the Duchess, Spenser did it with the Shepherd's Calendar, and Virgil did something similar as well. So it's pretty clear that Milton believes that he is kind of announcing his poetic career here in this famous poem, Lycidas, from roughly year 29 years old, 29, 30 years old. Amazing. Okay? Now, it is sad that I don't have time to do a full study of this poem, but we'll at least do the opening lines. Just listen to the beauty of this lines. He's lost this friend that matters to him, and he's going to write a poem about it. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and once more, ye myrtles brown with ivy never sere, I come to pluck your berries harsh and crude, and with forced fingers rude shatter your leaves before the mellowing year. He says, even though I'm young, I want to write mature poetry. Berries, harsh, crude. In other words, coming to their full fruition. Even though I'm young, I want to write a really great poem about the passing of my dear friend. Bitter constraint and sad occasion dear compels me to disturb your season due. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. Do you hear the repetitions of the words dead, dead, and then of course Lycidas twice? It's beautiful poetic language to say, I've lost my pal. I'm really sad about that. Who would not sing for Lycidas? He knew himself to sing, Edward King wrote poetry, and build the lofty rhyme. He must not float above his watery bier, unwept, and welter to the parching wind without the meed of some melodious tear. He says a few lines later to the nymphs in the sea, "Where were ye, nymphs, when the remorseless deep closed over the head of your loved Lycidas?" He can't believe that his pal has drowned. And then finally, the last lines of the poem we'll read together because they're so famous. And of course, we're going to have at 3A some observations. Look, Homeward Angels, just Google that title and see the significance of that. Let's finish, shall we? Look, homeward angel, he's speaking now to Lycidas, to his pal. Now, look, homeward angel, now, and melt with ruth, and O ye dolphins, waft the hapless youth. By the way, pointing out here that there are no dolphins in the Irish Sea. Of course, here we are now moving to the Mediterranean, and it appears as if Milton, as poet, is beginning to want to identify himself with the greatest poets of them all, especially, of course, Virgil, we think of. Weep no more, woeful shepherds, weep no more, for Lycidas, your sorrow is not dead. Sunk though he be beneath the watery floor, so sinks the day star in the ocean bed, and yet anon repairs his drooping head, and tricks his beams, and with new-spangled ore flames in the forehead of the morning sky. So Lycidas sunk low, but mounted high through the dear might of him that walked the waves, Jesus Christ, of course, where other groves and other streams along with nectar pure, his oozy locks he laves, and hears the unexpressive nuptial song in the blessed kingdoms meek of joy and love. These oozy locks we'll come back to in Paradise Lost, by the way. What is he saying? He's saying that in the same way that the sun goes down on the horizon, but then it comes up, Lycidas will have his phoenix-like resurrection, we might say, to continue and finish. In the blessed kingdoms meek of joy and love, there entertain him all the saints above. He knows that Lycidas, that Edward King has gone to heaven, and there will enjoy the saints. In solemn troops and sweet societies that sing, and singing in their glory, move and wipe the tears forever from his eyes. Let's just point out with this singing thing that Milton was raised around music. His father was an amateur musician himself, and in fact published some music. And Milton loves music, and he loves singing. And here he says, there will be singing where you are now, Lycidas. Now, to finish, Lycidas, the shepherds weep no more. Henceforth thou art the genius of the shore, and thy large recompense shall be good to all that wander in that perilous flood. And then a few more lines to finish the poem. It's amazing. All of the amazing allusions and references. We think here, for example, of T.S. Eliot and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock and Holloman and Wasteland we've studied already. Notice here that Milton assumes there's a whole lot that you have, as readers, have read, and he's making all these different allusions. I really challenge you to go and find this poem, read it online, enjoy it. It's such a compelling work. It really is. Now, the last section that we have in the Harvard Classics is poems written during the Civil War and the Protectorate from 1642 to 1658. And I wish that I had more time to work with a number of these poems, but I'll only finish with what many consider to be the most important sonnet of this time period, 1655, at the age of 47, 48 years old. And it's called On His Blindness. Now, we're 10 years away from Paradise Lost, okay? And Milton, just to point out, is 47 years old. And in 1652, he already had begun to go blind. So 3 years prior to the writing of this poem. Now think about this for a moment, and then we'll finish. Milton believes, deeply believes, that he was born given amazing talent by God, the great taskmaster of an earlier poem, at the age of 23. And he has this unbelievable ambition, along with this prodigious ability, that he is going to do something great in writing. And then he starts going blind. And then it hits him. How can I do anything great in writing if I am blind? With all of that, he will write this famous sonnet. When I consider how my light is spent, obviously he's going blind, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent, there it is, Matthew 25, which is death to hide, lodged with me, useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker, it's capitalized, and present my true account, lest he, his Maker, God, the Father in the story of Matthew 25, returning chide. Quote, Marx, doth God exact day labor, light deny? I finally asked. In other words, just because I've gone blind, is that my excuse? Do I have an excuse now to not use my talent? Milton is no quitter. I would write that down. Milton is no quitter. But he has a challenge. He has all of this ambition. He has all of this drive. He has all this knowledge. He has all this ability. He has all this talent. What to do? He imagines patience, with a capital P, is going to speak now to him. But patience, to prevent that murmur of, I'm a loser, even because I haven't created anything and I'm losing my sight. But patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, quote, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed, and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait. Milton, writing a poem to himself, says, I have to be patient, but I have to continue to dream of greatness. And a few years later, he will write that great poem, Paradise Lost. Let's finish with final thoughts, shall we? First of all,